Hello, hello. I am live and pretty nervous because a lot can happen when you go live in a family of 5 people. Um, and I hope there are some people here with me, but you know what? I'm not technical enough to see, so at least I don't think I can. No, that will be too confusing. So I'm just going to start. And today we're doing First Chapter Friday. My book is A Fall from Grace. Some of you have read it, I think. And A Fall from Grace, it's been really fun to write. It's the first in a series, the Clavering Chronicles, a story of Lucius and Selena. And I'm actually cheating and I'm reading the second chapter because the first chapter was not what I wrote first. I wrote it after the fact when I realized that I needed it. And it's a little bit short and there's not the meet cute. And who doesn't want the meet cute, right? So kind of cheating. I hope you guys are all okay with that. So off we go. Clavering Chronicles, and I will not be nervous. I will get through this. Okay. How can I do this? Let's see. Hold on. Okay. The next to last passenger to quit the stagecoach, a buxom woman who'd claimed to be a sick nurse for the gentry, exited the tilting vehicle in a swirl of snowflakes that did not appear to worry the driver if his shouts at each stop were any indication, and therefore Selena Lockhart decided they would not worry her. The fat flakes would seem harmless, friendly little things, were they not accompanied by a biting cold. The departing passenger graced Selena with a generous whack on the shoulder from the basket she'd slung over her solid back, a blow that would surely leave its mark. Although she had been garrulous and smelled of garlic and spirits, Selena missed her presence the minute the door to the stagecoach closed and they rejoined the road. When 2 of them had shared the warmth of the enclosed carriage, Selena had been able to dismiss her bleak thoughts about the future. Alone, she shivered. At first, the cold caused little tremors as she adjusted to the invasion of frigid air, and she tried in vain to wrap her cloak even more tightly about her. Then her teeth began to chatter, audibly. Well, Selena, you insisted on this course of action, and now must see it through. Besides, anything must be better than the disagreeable attentions of Robert Bromley, who was entering his dotage, and still imagined she must be grateful for his offer. After another half-hour of fruitless meditation, the stagecoach jerked to a sudden stop and tilted on its axis. Selena lurched forward, banging her head on the opposite seat with a force that brought tears to her eyes. With her luck, that would leave another mark, and one more visible. There was a bustle and shout as the driver, along with a lone passenger seated on top of the stagecoach, who had tried to coax his way inside without success since he had not paid the additional fare, climbed down to inspect the damage. Selena lifted the heavy leather curtain and watched the activity from her window. Right stuck we are, the driver said with a scowl. He batted the snow off his hat and shoved it back on his head. 'Tis no surprise with thee tooling the coach in that neck-or-nothing way. The passenger shook his head in disgust. The driver stuck his chin forward. What'd you say? Selena bit her lip. The 2 had been exchanging sharp words since the roof passenger was taken up several hours earlier, and the bickering added to her sense of isolation. A thought occurred to her, born out of desperation. Perhaps she was close enough to her destination to walk, since the next stop was hers. Their voices kept rising in pitch, and before the men broke out into an outright brawl, Selena picked up her portmanteau and pushed open the door. If courage could not spring up on its own, she must conjure it. Miss, no need for you to be leaving the carriage. The driver paused in his altercation, treating her to the dismissive tone he had used with her since he recognized her low station. We'll be on our way again in 2 shakes. What's this you're jawing on about? The passenger balled his hands and placed them squarely on his hips. This carriage ain't going nowhere. We'll need a job horse to pull us out, and several men asides. The driver puffed up his chest like a prize cock about to fight. 'Tain't you the driver of this vehicle. Excuse me, Selena interrupted. She would not be deterred by the driver's high-handed manner. What did he know of her station anyway? Do either of you know where we are? Serving her with an impatient glance, the driver gave a curt answer. Just entered Woolmer Green. Turning back to the passenger, he added, and this is a broad stretch of flat road. Woolmer Green meant nothing to her. How close are we to Harrowden Estate? Harrowden. With deliberate disdain, the driver pulled his gaze from the passenger and rubbed his chin. It's nigh 4 miles from here, I reckon. Selina's determination began to waver, and she huddled in her cloak, taking refuge from the flurry of snowflakes. Then it will not be possible to walk from here. She looked at the coachman. What are your plans, sir? Do you truly think we shall become unstuck? She pleaded him silently with her eyes. No blustering. I need the truth. The driver opened his mouth to give a quick answer, but paused when the passenger raised his eyebrows. At last he spoke, as if the words were forced out of him. Perhaps he's got the right of it. The wheels hit a frozen rut and the axles broke. It's only 3 miles to the last posting inn. He then surveyed her cloaked figure with interest. We'll just unhitch these horses and you can ride with me. The flash of revulsion that hit her was involuntary and instantaneous. No, I don't think I shall join you, Selina said in a strong voice that surprised even her. The portmanteau, which she had been cradling in her arms, she took securely by the handle. I will seek shelter at the house over yonder whose windows are lit. I am quite sure they will take pity on my plight and lend their assistance. You are to bring my trunk to the next stop as planned, and I'll have Lady Harrowden send someone to pick it up at the posting inn there tomorrow. Selina spoke with a confidence she was far from feeling. In any case, should brigands come to loot the carriage while you are away, goodness knows I have nothing of value to steal. She did not wait for their reaction, but turned and began to walk. A few feet into the tree-lined path, and she could no longer hear their argument, which had sprung back to life in her wake. The silence was a relief. All too well did she know what a vulnerable position she was in, traveling alone with only 2 men of unknown morals to accompany her. The quicker they forgot about her, the better. No, it was more prudent to head toward the manor she saw in the distance. It was of a decent size, which meant servants and respectability, and mentioning she was to visit Lady Harrowden would give her the protection she needed. The silence became less friendly as she trudged on in the snow, and the house seemed farther than she had first judged. There was a movement in the trees to her right, which set her heart pounding, and her arms ached from the weight of her portmanteau and the books she had stored in it. Her feet burned from cold, and bits of snow slipped into the top of her boots as she sank into the white powder with each step. Selina arrived at last and rapped the knocker on the front door, which echoed inside. She attempted to swallow the lump in her throat as she waited in the cold silence, and she cast her gaze about the 2-storied stone manor, decked with 8 windows on each floor. The hoot of an owl came from the trees to her right, and she jumped at the eerie, lonely sound. 3 years should have been sufficient to prepare her for this, but the stretch of time didn't seem to be enough. 1 year to recover from the shock of her father, having gambled away his entire fortune, plunged himself headlong into drink, for Matthew Downing to rescind his offer of marriage, and for the fickle attention of former friends in the ton to dwindle to nothing. 1 year to dash all hopes that a new life could be created at her mother's small property in Bedford, where enough of the gentry were connected to the pulse of London society and its delicious gossip. 1 year to sink further into poverty as her father succumbed in his weakened state to the influenza, and the collectors came to take what little there was left. It was hard enough to leave home, the responsible daughter and the eldest of 4, but she had persuaded her mother it was the only thing to do after refusing to enter into a loveless marriage, and indeed it was. They had no means to give her sisters a London season, where their sweetness of temper and charming countenances might cause some gentleman to contemplate an unequal match. At least with Selina gone, it would be one less mouth to feed for her mother. And Lady Harrowden was offering a respectable salary. If ever Selina had needed a sign from Providence that she was on the right path, the timing of this position was it. Or so she had thought until now. The door opened, but the man behind it did not have the look of a servant. His clothes were too fine, and he had a handsome chin and noble brow with a prominent crease in the middle of it. There was a look of haughty superiority on his face, and if she wasn't mistaken, irony. "Yes, miss. How may I be of assistance?" Good evening, sir. I was bound for Harrodon, but the stagecoach is broken down. I saw the lights in this house from the road and had hoped to find assistance here. I did not expect to host a hen house when I had the shutters open today, was his cryptic reply. Harrodon, at least you're in the right town. What an odd greeting. It was nothing Selina could answer, so she waited for him to continue. And what is your business with Lady Harrodon? His cynical gaze swept over Selina, and she was made to feel as shabby as she surely looked. Not only was her cloak several seasons old, but it had lost its luster and patches. A companion, I presume? Selina fumed for a moment. If only this man had known her before her disgrace. He would never dare to speak to her in such an impertinent manner. She couldn't give him the set-down she longed to, not when she was dependent upon him for help. Why should his reaction surprise her, though? It was the way of society. You have surmised correctly, sir. Selina waited, still on the doorstep, with a cold at her back, but he did not bid her enter. Perhaps she had made a grave error in coming here on her own, but she had nowhere to turn now. The stagecoach driver was long gone, and all she would have was an empty coach or a 4-mile trek to Harrodon, where she was sure to get lost or freeze to death before ever she reached it. Behind the gentleman, a movement caught her eye and revealed itself in the form of a young woman, smartly dressed in a cream gown and evening primrose yellow spencer. She looked young to be this man's wife, but no other explanation offered itself. Selina relaxed at once and gave her a brilliant smile. Good evening, ma'am. I am relieved to see the mistress of the house is at home. I had begun to fear I had fallen on a bachelor establishment. The look the woman sent her husband confused Selina because it was not one of self-assurance. Was she newly married, then, and not comfortable in her position? Selina narrowed her eyes. Perhaps this house was run by a despot, whose own wife cowered before him, which would be very like this gentleman if his initial greeting were any indication. But she could not give up this chance to appeal to another woman. Her whole safety depended upon it. I assure you, I shall not trouble you for long, Selina said, ignoring the gentleman. If word can be sent to Harrodon, I am quite certain they will send someone immediately to fetch me. This is rich, the gentleman murmured, as he looked at his wife. He took a step back and folded his arms, a mocking smile on his face. Without sparing him a glance, Selina turned the full force of her pleading gaze on the one who could help her. The woman hemmed. Go on, the gentleman urged his wife, waiting for her to speak. He almost seemed to take pleasure in her discomfiture. Had Selina stumbled on a madhouse? With a timid glance at her husband, the young woman said, I am sure a supper might be prepared for you in the kitchen. Is that not so? A voice came from beyond the hosts. Sir, the supper has been brought up and is waiting for you in the dining room. His gaze fixed on Selina, the gentleman called over his shoulder, set another plate. So he was intending to let her in. Good. She could no longer feel her toes, and even her warm cloak was beginning to be ineffective against the biting cold. He opened the door wider, and she took a step in. Thank you, sir. She turned to his wife and graced her with a small curtsy. And you, ma'am. Miss Woodsley is not, in fact, my wife, the gentleman said as he led the way to the dining room. He did not look back as he said it, and Selina was left to decipher its meaning. The implication came upon her at once, and she felt a flush mount to her cheeks. She had not stumbled into a madhouse, no. She had stumbled into a house of vice. No wonder that poor girl looked so uncomfortable. Would he expect something of Selina? Was she to be another of his conquests? Even the snow was preferable to that. She followed behind numbly. At long last her courage deserted her, and Selina felt tears prick at the back of her eyelids. Her host stopped before a dark wooden door and opened it, ushering the young lady in before him. When Selina came to the door, he glanced at her face and stayed her with a light pressure on her shoulder. She trembled from cold and fear, unable to meet his gaze, but he stepped closer until she was forced to look up. He seemed to be studying her, searching for something in her eyes, and Selina's heart beat strangely. I will not hurt you, he said. his voice low, as if soothing a wounded animal. Without releasing her from his gaze, he called out to his servant, "Can we drive to Harrodon in this weather? Find out from Finn. We are going to escort this young woman there this evening." "Right away, Sir Lucius." The servant hurried off to do his bidding. "Thank you," Selina whispered, and, released from his nearness, stepped in front of him into the dining room where a servant was pouring the drinks. Any thought that Miss Woodley might be as terrified as she was vanished as the young woman sent a calculating glance at the gentleman entering the room behind Selina. Turning with a seductive smile that was at odds with her wispy, childlike voice, Miss Woodley leaned forward. "Sir Lucius, you were beginning to tell me how we might make our way to Caldecott. It is so good of you to offer." He sat and leaned back as the servant dished soup into his bowl. "We shall have to hope the weather will hold so that we may indeed set out tomorrow. In the meantime, I believe fate has sent us an answer in the form of Miss—" He turned to Selina and raised his brows in question. "Miss Lockhart," she supplied. "In the form of Miss Lockhart. As we are to bring Miss Lockhart to Harrodon, we shall request that Lady Harrodon put you up for the night to keep your reputation safe. In the morning, I shall come to relieve them of your unexpected presence and bring you to Caldecott, where I might restore you to your friends, who must be beside themselves with worry." His eyes twinkled with private amusement, and now Selina was truly confused. Was this woman not his mistress? Perhaps he was not the rake Selina had assumed him to be. She hadn't noticed the servant filling her bowl with steaming soup, but now she felt its warmth on her face. "I am much obliged to you, sir," Selina replied, glancing at Miss Woodley. Upon closer inspection, she could not be more than 18. How came she to be here? Miss Woodley wound the napkin around her fingers in a nervous gesture, and when she spoke, she had lost some of her self-assurance. "Sir Lucius, I admire your noble impulse to protect my reputation, but Lady Harrodon will not be expecting me. I cannot impose upon her household in such a way. She paused to take a convulsive breath, and Selina thought she might be suffering from fear, until Miss Woodley blurted out, "Surely we can contrive to protect my reputation whilst I stay here, and then set out at an early hour in the morning with none the wiser." Selina's eyes widened. It had seemed at first glance that Sir Lucius was the hunter and Miss Woodley the hunted, but now— "You mistake me," Sir Lucius replied, picking up his spoon. "I am not concerned with your reputation." Selina wasn't the only one who received a jolt from his harsh words. Across from her, Miss Woodley looked as if she had been slapped. "I am, at present," Sir Lucius continued, "only concerned with my own." No sooner had he spoken the words than the rap of another visitor echoed through the house. Sir Lucius picked up his wineglass and held it in his hands. A smile hovered on the corner of his mouth. "Ah, now the fun begins." And that's it. That's my second chapter from A Fall from Grace. Thank you so much for listening, and see you soon.